All right, we're going to get started. Hopefully some additional folks will join us. We had a pretty good crowd the last time at the first forum, and we will be having some additional forums. Certainly, I think, as you know, as we go through this process, we'll have some additional forums even before the first draft comes out that people can respond to through the working groups that I'll talk about here in a few moments. So those will be more focused working groups that we'll have as we go through the next few months. But what I want to do is just, this is a live feed also, so this is going to be made available to the entire campus, both currently and I believe probably through a website in perpetuity, at least through this process. So I want to go through this, and then we'll have some opportunities for questions and some input from those of you who are here at the end of the meeting. But many of you have heard this presentation if you've been involved in some of the process already. But I'm going to go through this PowerPoint, and it really describes the planning process and outlines that in terms of the different organizations involved and the different steps in the process. But a very important part of this process, as you will see, and as we go through the next 6 months, is really around trying to optimize communications. And so that is what's led to a fairly large number of committees, a reasonably large steering committee that's going to provide oversight to this process, fairly large working groups that are going to focus on addressing specific activities and specific components of our mission that we will then, again, develop strategies for, overarching objectives, goals, strategies, actions, metrics as we go through this process. Just another sort of introductory comment, which I think is very important, is, as you know, in the last, for the last 4+ years, we've been implementing the strategic plan that it was implemented, and it was developed when the president arrived in that first year, was completed, approved by the board, and now under sort of my leadership and engagement of the entire campus have been implementing that plan. And so now we're at a point where that 5 years is going to be up, and we will begin, to develop a plan that will begin next, implementation next summer, basically, hopefully with approval by the board, at the end of the spring semester. So we're building off of a current plan. We're calling it the development of a new strategic plan, but we're by no means starting from ground zero. So we are building off of the vision and the mission and the underlying principles and goals of that first plan, and I'll kind of comment on that here in a few moments. So let me begin with that, and again, this is building off of Forward Thinking, which was the plan that went from 2008 to present to 2013. As I mentioned, it was developed during the academic year 07-08, which was President Snyder's first year here. It was a very faculty engaged process. It was one, and staff and all stakeholders. It was a process in which the schools and the college also developed their strategic plans in parallel with the university strategic plan. And as I'll comment here a little later, that's a little different than what we're going to do as we go through this particular process. And so again, as I mentioned, it's in the 5th year of implementation as we go through this. So we are going to continue to build off of our current mission and vision. And our mission, of course, is to improve people's lives through preeminent research, education, and creative endeavor. The ways we accomplish this is, of course, through research and scholarship, through learning that is active and creative in the classroom, out of the classroom, and the promotion of an inclusive culture. One of the things that, if you've been in some of the forums, and as you know, Barbara and I get around twice a year to each school and meet with the faculty and staff and talk about kind of update on where things are at. I usually provide an update on the strategic plan progress to that point. And I often will talk about one of the underlying goals and principles of our current strategic plan is to really advance the excellence, the impact, and the reputation of this university through greater partnership and collaboration across the campus. Like many campuses, we are a place that is often viewed internally and externally as too siloed, too focused within the schools, the college, other organizations, centers. And the goal really today is through more interdisciplinary work, more multidisciplinary work, whether that's through research and scholarship or even in the classroom in terms of more collaborative teaching across disciplines. That's really one of the underlying principles and goals. And I think we've been very successful at that over the past 4 years through the different development of, for example, the alliances, whether it's in energy, culture, creativity, and design, significant efforts and some pretty significant investment to try to get people to work together across the campus. It has led to the development, for example, of a number of interdisciplinary centers, whether that's in materials or social justice or other areas. So this is where we've been. Again, the vision, we aspire to be recognized internationally as an institution that imagines and influences the future. And again, some specific sub-points there is to, again, support specific academic fields along with interdisciplinary areas. And so obviously you can't have strong interdisciplinary areas unless you have a strong underpinning of the disciplinary fields that make those up. And so we're really focusing on advancing both of those. Provide students with knowledge, skills, experiences necessary to become the leaders in a world of rapid change, increasing interdependency, nurture scholars who are cooperative, collegial, build on relationships with our world-class healthcare, cultural, educational community. So again, this is how we're going to achieve this vision, is through many of these different particular specific sort of goals. Our core values, of course, is always academic excellence and impact, inclusiveness and diversity, integrity and transparency, and effective stewardship. And so much of what, even if you look at the current plan, is also focused on achieving and providing these core values as we move the university forward. So again, as I've said, we will build on the foundation of forward thinking. We've developed a steering committee, and we've had several meetings, and I'll show you that here in a few moments. But one of the interesting observations that was made at the steering committee meeting, and actually had been previously made when Barbara and I visited with the Faculty Senate leadership before the school year began, was the fact that we think that in this next plan, we need to be, and we have the ability to be, because of the progress made in the last 4 years, to be bolder and more assertive in that planning process than perhaps we were in the first plan. And I think as we see this plan evolve over the next several months, it's quite possible that we will come back and tweak this vision and tweak this mission, in fact, to make it a somewhat bolder, more aggressive, more assertive vision and mission. One reason for that, again, is the ability of the great progress we've made as an institution, and we're able to do that. But another is the fact that the external forces around us, and you read about those every day in the challenges related to higher education, we are really going to be required, I think, to make bolder, more aggressive moves as we move forward. These are some of the issues I've already alluded to in higher education that the planning committees, the working groups, the steering committee are all going to have to consider and incorporate into their planning processes as they develop their specific components of this plan, and ultimately as they are integrated together into an overall strategic plan. And that, of course, ranges from changing student demographics to the impact of technology, which is huge. We read about it every day with online learning and all kinds of other various impacts that technology has. Impacts of globalization. Of course, in the last plan, a very important part of that was a huge stress on internationalization, the creation of an Office of Internationalization, the appointment of an Associate Provost, David Flesher, to lead that. That's really becoming increasingly important. My high priority, as you know, that every student who wants to have a study abroad experience has that ability to have that type of an experience on this campus. And so we see that, and of course the globalization piece in not only student activities but research and other areas being increasingly important, all the way down to the fact that we have an aging infrastructure on campus. Is just another thing that if you look in this room, that we are challenged with and that we have to work with. So there's a whole variety here of these big issues that we're going to have to deal with and address and consider as context to our planning process. Again, the process, you can see here, we've got the scan initially. So the starting point of this is to collect quite a bit of information. We've got a website that's been created you can go to for the planning process. It includes quite a bit of information on the accomplishments of the last 4 years in terms of implementation of the current strategic plan, and talks quite a bit about the process that we're going through, lists the committees, lists the various timelines for this current planning process. So we're going to begin by collecting information on the current progress made. We've also asked each school in the college and each leadership vice presidential organization to provide us with their scan, sort of an update on their progress, their priorities. Probably we've given them about 9 sort of directive questions, which we've asked them to answer. And that information is coming back to us actually in the next few days. That will also be provided to the working groups to provide sort of a current understanding of what are the priorities of the organizational pieces of this university going into this planning process. And again, much of that will be based on the progress that each of those organizations have made over the past 4 years as they've implemented their strategic plans. So that's what we're at with the school. We call them school SWOTs, strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threat documents. The plan will be creating working groups. Those have been created. Those will be getting together immediately, beginning probably next week. And I'll show you what those are here in a moment. We'll also have planning retreats in which the working groups present their information, looking for opportunities in all-day retreats to look for synergies between the different recommendations that the working groups are created. So you would expect, for example, the working group on undergraduate education, or the component of that group on education that deals with undergraduate education, to also have quite a bit of crosstalk with the group that's doing research, because obviously undergraduate research is one of our very high priorities here. It's something that our students come here looking to do, and so you'll be synergies between those two working groups as they develop plans, metrics for even just the area of undergraduate research as we go into the next plan. There'll be planning retreats, and ultimately a draft plan will be developed. Feedback, we've had these forms. There's an online form as part of this website. And as I mentioned earlier, there'll be additional forms that we go through the coming weeks from the working groups. And that provides the community feedback. We'll develop the plan. The plan will then be reviewed, vetted. There'll be various editions of that plan. We'll have open forums once that plan is out there so people can come in. I would expect, frankly, those forums to be much better attended, to give us feedback on what we're proposing in the new plan, and that will happen also probably in that March-April timeframe. So a very busy process, in some sense, we have a lot to do over the next 6 or 7 months. It's a very aggressive plan. If this was starting from ground zero, I would say it's too aggressive of a plan, having been through these planning processes several times before in my academic career. This one, since we're building off of a strong plan already, I think we can accomplish this, even though it is still fairly aggressive over that time frame. I'm optimistic we can achieve our goals. Again, here's the organizational structure. You can see the steering committee. I'll comment more on that in a moment. But the goal here is to really have, as is demonstrated by these large blue arrows, a tremendous amount of communication, interaction, exchange between these different pieces of the university. Certainly the steering committee, providing oversight, Dean's Council, President's Cabinet, my Provost Advisory Council, the working groups, and you can see those are in areas of research and innovation, transforming education, which will cover undergraduate education, graduate and professional, and also lifelong learning education, which is becoming increasingly important. Research and innovation covers research scholarship across the campus. Our people, which really deals with how do we best support and enable the success of our faculty, our staff, our students, and other components, other stakeholders, but particularly those three. Operations and infrastructure. If we go back to our founding principles, again, the goal here is that we want to be as efficient and effective as we can as a university, and so that group will look at everything from the budget process to other ways in which we can improve efficiencies across the campus. And finally, the CWRU 2026 committee is a sort of an unusual committee in this process in that, as I've mentioned earlier, this is another 5-year plan that will build on the past 5-year plan, and so it will be designed primarily for that purpose. However, as we look into our future at our 200th anniversary in 2026, we know that there's a lot out there. I've listed that list of issues that we're going to have to deal with, and we know they're going to continue to grow and to be even more significant going out 10, 15, 20 years. So this committee is really going to be the group that looks farther ahead and says, what are some of the non-incremental, major innovations we can make as a university in all these different areas that positions us to be not only great in the next 4 or 5 years, but really addresses some of the longer-term issues that positions us to be a much better place in terms of, again, the excellence, impact, and reputation of the university and its components as we move into that 2020, 2025, 2026 time frame. And so that's what I'm looking for from that committee. I am actually trying to assemble my most creative, innovative, out-of-the-box thinkers from across this campus to serve on that committee. And we've got a great collection of folks with those attributes who have been assembled to work that area. The process, again, will be focused on these working groups. In the last plan, which again was the original planning process, we also had some working groups in areas of diversity, internationalization, and some of these other areas, which we really are not going to recreate those. As you know, we've developed some great strategic plans in diversity and internationalization over the past couple of years. Those have been approved by the Faculty Senate. They're now being implemented. So I really didn't see the need to go back and create a working group specific to that. What we will be charging the working groups and some of their members is to consider, very importantly, along with the vice presidential folks who lead those areas to work together to make sure that diversity, internationalization, IT, technology are very thoroughly integrated into the plans in all these other areas. And again, through these other forums, that there's a lot of that occurs in a synergistic way, in a very integrated way as we go through this process. So again, the steering committee, as I've already described, sponsor and guide the planning process. This is a group of about 30, 35 people that include university administrators. The membership of this is actually on the website. It includes a large number of faculty, staff, students, undergraduate students, graduate students, professional students, some external alumni, some members of our advisory boards. So it's a very large group, very broad in terms of representing all the different components of the university and the different stakeholders of the university. So the goal there with that group, and they've met 3 times so far and have periodic meetings about every 2 weeks going forward, is to develop the, look at the strategic issues, the opportunities, look at the big picture, develop the framing questions that I'll show you here in a moment that we will address in this process and in this plan, monitor the progress of the working groups and provide guidance, participate in the development of the goals and strategies, and serve as liaisons with the various stakeholder groups. So they have a very important role in kind of providing the broad oversight to this process. Again, working groups, again, research innovation, I'm not going to go through this. I would encourage you to go on the website and go through these on this presentation. But for example, these are some of the specific issues that each of these working groups will be looking at and focusing on. And so we'll just take, for example, the research innovation. So how do we diversify sources of research funding? We know, for example, right now that federal research funding in particular is of great concern in terms of where is that going over the next, frankly, weeks, but also years as we go forward. So what are some ways we can broaden our research funding? Should we and can we and how do we, for example, increase in certain areas the amount of corporate and industry research support through partnerships with companies, which is an area we need to enhance. So I think that's an important part of what this group will look at. Look at what are our current areas of research leadership, what are areas that we may be that are going to be very important going forward where we probably aren't as strong as we need to be, and how do we strengthen those? And are there some areas, for example, that we're not even on the map yet, but we know as you look out 5 years, certainly 10 years, 15 years toward that 2026, that this is an area of research and scholarship that we have to have a presence in if we're going to continue to be a major research university in this country and in this world. So again, that's some of what they're going to be looking at. Strengthen the role of research in undergraduate education. We've got a great class this year. It's our largest class ever. I talked with many of the parents when they were here. Rick certainly talked to them, and almost every one of them comments on the fact that their young person is here because of the ability they have to do undergraduate research. Large number of pre-med students in biology and biomedical engineering, and they're here because of the ability to work with medical students, with the hospitals, and so we have to continue to really make sure, like study abroad, that undergraduate research is something that if a student has an interest in that, we're able to provide them with a great experience. And so we're going to have to continue to have this group look at that. So again, a number of issues in each one of these areas, whether it's research, transforming education, our people, and finance, operations, infrastructure, or CWRU 2026. Each of those groups is going to have to look at these focus issues and develop their plans around these, along with several others. Again, here's the planning process timeline. I've reviewed this before. The goal is to end up, a lot of work over the next few months by the working groups. And then that will lead, when they're done, to the integration of those plans into the overall plan. That will be vetted for a month or two with the campus, with the broader stakeholder groups, refined, and ultimately finalized to be reviewed by the Board of Trustees. Let me just spend a couple moments, and I would encourage you to go on the website, and there will be an online ability there to provide responses and input and suggestions back to us on each of these framing questions. But we tried to get some basic questions working with our consultants in order to provide some sort of overarching focus and context on this process. So we developed these framing questions, and each of these working groups will be asked to respond to these as part of their plan. So for example, question 1 is, how do we compete more effectively with other comprehensive research universities, especially with our peers and aspirant groups, as you might expect? How can we enhance our excellence, impact, and reputation as supported by national and global rankings? And how do we do that both as a university, and how do we do that for our specific programs, schools across the campus? So that's, again, something that we want everybody to think about. What are some specific ways we can do this? And each of these plans, whether it's in research or education, is going to be focused on how do we, again, provide a higher degree of excellence impact. In many areas, reputation obviously is very important. Not all areas across our campus have rankings. Some areas do, and certainly the university does. And it's very important, I think, in our ability to attract the best students and the best faculty that we do everything we can to see those rankings continue to improve. We've made some great progress over the past few years in this department, but we need to continue to move this forward. Another example, and again, I'll go through these pretty quickly, is what have been the most significant successes of the existing strategic plan, what additional actions are required to continue to realize important strategies, for example, the alliances. So as I mentioned earlier, we've made some excellent progress in many areas. I'll use the alliances as one example. But where do the alliances go from here? You know, what's in this next 5 years? What's the role of the alliances? Do we create new alliances? Do we say some of these alliances have graduated and now are on their own in terms of ultimately, for example, creating a center or an institute, and we move in some new directions? So that's part of, you know, this next plan. Is we've made great progress on many fronts: diversity, internationalization, interdisciplinary work, but where do we go from here, and how do we build on that result of the first plan as we move into this second 5 years? How do we respond to demographic, economic, technological changes in higher education? This goes back to that list of 10 or 15 items that I showed you earlier and who commented on that. What changes should be made to continue to enhance the things that we already do well? We know these issues are changing: demographics, the economics, whether it's, you know, student loan issues, the ability of parents and young people to pay for a fairly high-priced education that we have here at Case Western Reserve University, to the demographics of how is that student body changing. You know, one of the things, as you know, we've been able to accomplish over the past year or so is the movement from a student enrollment base that is very regional, you know, Ohio and Midwest based, to a much more national and global base. That's going to continue to change, and we need to continue to be responsive to that if we're going to continue to bring in outstanding students to this campus at the undergraduate level, graduate and professional levels. What are 3 to 5 most important major actions or investments that would produce transformative rather than incremental change to enhance competitiveness and achieve excellence? As I mentioned before, you know, as you go through in building off of the past plan in several areas, some of the changes will continue to be incremental as we continue to ratchet different areas up in terms of what they've been able to accomplish. What we're also looking at, including, in addition to those incremental improvements at a fairly significant pace over the next 5 years, are what are some transformative, non-incremental, disruptive changes that can be made at this university that really advance us and allow us in some areas to leapfrog the competition in terms of, again, providing great programs, great experiences for our students, great research accomplishments that we can do over the next several years. So that's what every committee is going to be asked to do. That's what this 2026 committee, that's going to be the primary goal of that committee, is to really look for those major changes in the context of how they look at things coming forward in the next, again, 10 or 15 years. And what are top, 3 to 5 barriers to success that we must overcome? And I talked about some of those earlier in terms of, even if you go back into some of our fiscal models on this campus, where we have a very decentralized budgeting process. Is that a process? And we know it is, and we've been working through some of the issues in the first 5 years of this plan by the creation of the University Budget Committee and some other actions to try to figure out ways to improve the ability to collaborate across the campus through our fiscal models. And we're going to have to continue to work those areas, whether, again, it's around research collaborations or whether it's around interdisciplinary teaching and classroom experiences. So those are going to be, again, something that each of these working groups is going to address in their particular area. Framing question 6, how do funding, planning, assessment practices need to evolve and improve our ability to execute our plans? Obviously, at the end of the day, you have to have the resources to move forward in these new areas and to continue to implement our strategic planning process. So this will be another issue that each one of these groups has to consider as they develop a plan for advancing undergraduate education. Don't just tell us what we need to do, but also talk about where the resources are going to come from, where can we reallocate resources, are there certain things we have to decide are no longer relevant and important and disinvest in those areas to reinvest in new areas of higher priority. Those are some of the decisions that each of these areas and each of these working groups is going to have to make as we develop and finalize this plan. Again, the resources are available on the websites. This includes everything from some of the achievements of the current strategic planning process, the Alliance websites, my website, the International Strategic Plan, Diversity Strategic Plan, ITS plans are all available for you to take a look at if you haven't already. And so this is all information that these working groups and that all of you will be using as we go through this planning process. And that's pretty much all I have. Again, I would just say that one of my goals here is to really make sure, and we'll have some additional forums, hopefully at times when we can get better attendance than we see here today, is to really make sure we optimize communication. And today, much of that's going to occur online. So we're going to have to make sure we encourage people to provide feedback at different points, whether it's to working group reports or the overall strategic plan once it's drafted up, and have, again, tremendous opportunity for that engagement, because that's where the real value will come from as we develop this next plan. With that, have I covered everything, Chris, pretty much? Okay. Any questions or suggestions or comments as we go through this? Yes? Steve?
I guess that probably comes across several of the working groups, and they're all asked to respond to how technology is changing.
That's why, again, if you saw the diagram that showed how internationalization and diversity and technology is really needs to be integrated. We thought about, do we create a working group exclusively on IT, or on technology? And really, it is so pervasive, it impacts virtually every part of this university, to the extent, online education is just one example that obviously is becoming much more important as we go forward, and we're working that in several different areas across the campus, certainly with some of our online courses and online degree programs. But that's really what we're going to have to look at. How does technology, information technology, impact everything? So that's going to be one of the goals of each of these committees, and we'll probably actually even get to the point of having some members of these committees responsible for specifically making sure that diversity in educational parts of the plan are addressed, and IT certainly, and internationalization. And there are some others also. So that's the way we're going to handle this, rather than creating a specific group looking at online education. But it affects, for example, particularly, and Don Feek is leading the educational working group. It's no question it's going to have a huge effect on graduate and professional education and lifelong learning type of education. How much it affects undergraduate, certainly at this point, we know IT is increasingly impacting what happens in the classroom here through flipped classrooms and other experiences like that. How much we ultimately move to undergraduate education online I think that remains to be seen. It's something that this group will be responsible for thinking about and planning about. Other questions? You're a quiet bunch here. All right. Well, again, what I would ask you to do, if you do have observations, thoughts, get them back to me. As these working groups get developed, we will be back to you and provide some additional forms for you. If you're interested particularly in undergraduate education, then Don will have a working group form in which that smaller group comes together and provides hopefully some more informal conversation opportunities and engagement as they begin to develop their plan and as we go through this process. So again, thank you very much for being here today, and look forward to your engaging in this process. Appreciate it.